So we are already getting a taste of winter here, and that is causing us to start thinking about winter and the winter perils that our trees and shrubs will be facing. So that's what we're talking about here today. So first, I want to talk about a little bit of a review on what it is we're actually trying to protect from. Okay, what kind of damage we're protecting from. There we go. My computer is finally cooperating here with me. So what we have to remember is the vascular system inside the tree. And whether it's a tree or a shrub or any plant, just like we have veins and arteries that move things around in our system, so do trees. And again, all woody plants. So I just want to review that really quick because that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. So on a typical tree structure, on the outside edge, we would have the phloem that or we would have the bark, excuse me, we would have the corky bark. That's just there to protect things and to keep things keep things out that shouldn't be in there. And as the tree gets bigger, that bark gets corkier and thicker and more protection. Underneath that, we have a layer of cells, that's the phloem. And the phloem is basically where things go up or go from the top of the tree down to the bottom. So the carbohydrates and sugars and plant hormones and things that are up in the leaves need to get down throughout the tree, down to the roots so that the roots can grow and do their thing. And that's the phloem, and that's right underneath the bark. The next layer is a very thin layer of cells, the cambium. Those are the active cells that are dividing. They put on growth every year. That's what makes the tree trunk get a little bit fatter. And then inside that, we have the xylem, and the first part of the xylem next to the cambium is often called the sapwood, and that's active cells where stuff is going from the roots up to the top of the tree. So water and nutrients that are taken out of the soil and need to get up to the leaves. And then the middle part of the tree is also technically xylem, but often it's called the heartwood. And that's really a whole bunch of old dead cells that aren't super active anymore, but they are there providing structure and strength to the tree to keep it standing. And that's the basic vascular system of the tree. And we really, really need to protect that because anything, unlike us, if we cut our arm and we cut through a vein or an artery or something, it can heal back together and start pumping again. But with trees, that really doesn't happen. You can't do that. So if there's damage to the vascular system, it's there for the life of the tree. And depending on how bad it is, it may or may not affect the length of the life of that tree. Okay, so this is what we don't want. And this is what we see very often. This is a severe wound on a tree trunk here. And you can see that there is a lot of heartwood visible in the middle of this tree trunk here. And this has damaged the vascular system over 50% of the circumference of this tree. And that has really broken the connection from the roots to the canopy. And so this is what's happening on the right side here. You can see that's what's happening at the top of this tree. It's dying back because water can't get from the roots up to the tip of that tree. And so we're getting dieback. And this is a question that we get a lot in extension. And it is one of the first questions when people call and ask, why is my tree dying back at the top? One of the first questions we ask them is if there's any kind of a wound or old damage on the trunk of the tree. And very often there is. Okay, so what causes this? Usually, or very often, I should say, the damage was caused during winter and could have been prevented if protection had been provided. And that's what we're talking about here today. So one of the main causes of damage and what caused the damage on that particular tree I was just showing you is called sunscald. And sunscald is caused by sun, but it's in the late winter. So end of February, beginning of March, the sun angle has gotten a lot higher, the sun has gotten warmer, and what can happen is on a sunny day, that sun can warm the trunk of young trees. So here's a young tree that was planted within a year. You can see how thin that bark is on that tree. And so the sun warms the trunk of the tree. The cells underneath the bark start becoming active. They break dormancy. They kind of wake up a little bit. And then the sun either like goes behind a building into and then a shadow hits it, or the sun just goes down, and we all know, we're Wisconsinites, how cold it can get on a clear winter night. And that temperature might drop down to 10 or even 0. And those cells, because they became active during the day, they die. So they're frozen and killed by that cold that hits them. And once they die under there, there's nothing we can do to fix them. Another thing that exacerbates this is if there's a nice, shiny, fresh layer of snow, the sun will bounce off that snow and reflect onto that trunk and be even more intense and warm that trunk even more. So sunscald injuries later on, again, the tree will try to compensate for it by filling in from the sides, that sort of a thing, but there is always going to be a wound there. So here's another example on the right of an old wound caused by sunscald. The way you can tell for sure that, oh, I found a wound on my trunk and it's sunscald is that it's going to be on the south or southwest side of the trunk, because that's where that heavy sun was hitting it. Okay, so we need to protect against that, and wrapping young trees until the bark is thick and corky enough to protect the tree on its own is super, super important. And so if you have planted any young trees that are thin bark, and maples are notorious for this, but young fruit trees, any tree that has a smooth, thin bark on it, like you can see in this picture here, needs to be wrapped for the first, 4 to 5 years of that tree's life. And there are lots of different wraps out there. And sometimes, it's availability. Sometimes it's what works best for you. And honestly, it doesn't matter which wrap you use as long as you use a wrap, because if you miss one winter, you can cause irreparable damage to this tree that basically could cost its life. Okay. So the picture on the left here is a basic brown tree wrap. This is very common. It's been around a long time. It is the least favorable wrap. Okay, I repeat that, the least favorable wrap, because it's kind of dark brown, so it also can absorb the sun, and the warmth can go right through that paper and warm that trunk and activate those cells, and you still get damage with it. But if it's the only thing you have available, you can use it. Just wrap multiple layers over that trunk to provide more insulation. And even better, after you're done wrapping it, go in the house and find some leftover paint from when you painted your bathroom or something, some kind of light colored paint, and paint it on that paper so that that white or that light colored paint will reflect the sun off a little bit and prevent the warming as much. In the middle here, we have a corrugated tube tree wrap that, again, very commercially available. My favorite is probably this one on the right, which is the spiral kind. I find it the easiest to get on no matter how big the trunk is. And you have to be careful. Sometimes with these corrugated ones, you can scratch the bark as you're putting it on because it's kind of tight to deal with. The spiral one works really, really well, and you don't have that problem. The key is you want to wrap it all the way up to the lowest branch, because that sun can warm that whole trunk there and reflect off the snow on that whole size of that trunk. Once you get up into the branch areas, usually the branches themselves will shade the stem a little bit, but it's hard to wrap up into there anyway. It's also higher off the ground, so the sun reflecting off the snow isn't as intense up there. But again, lots of options out there. Ideally, we want something white or light color that's going to reflect the sun off, and we want it to be thick enough to make sure that the trunk doesn't warm underneath it. The key too, though, is that you need to remove these wraps every year, because remember that cambium that I mentioned is going to put on some new growth. The trunk is going to get wider every year. And so these wraps are up against the bark. They can restrict the tree trunk from expanding. And you can see here on this first picture of the spiral wrap where that wrap was left on all year, and it actually restricted the expansion of that trunk, and now we've got a wavy trunk there, and that we don't want, because you can actually cut into that vascular system and cause the wounds that you're trying to prevent. On the right here, this is a picture I took just 2 weeks ago in a city near me, and I'm not exactly sure what was going on here. I don't think these wraps have been left on for several years, and that's why they're spreading, because it would have restricted the trunk and it would be grown into the trunk after a couple of years on there. I think they actually just put these wraps on for this year, but I'm not sure why, because if you can look closely here down at the base, you can see that this bark is thicker and corkier. This tree does not need to be wrapped for sunscald anymore because it can protect itself. There may be some other reason why they were putting that wrap on the tree. Maybe winter snow removal equipment gets close to it or something. I'm not sure. But once that tree gets its own thick bark, you don't have to wrap anymore. The other reason you need to take these wraps off in spring, and we're talking about April, mid-April, whenever you get out there before growth starts, is that moisture can get down in there and hold moisture against the bark, and then that can cause some rotting and problems that way. Another thing that causes trunk damage to our trees during winter are animals, and specifically we're talking about deer, rabbits, and small rodents like voles. The deer can rub their antlers onto the trunk and cause a major wound on the tree. If the tree is really young, it can snap it right off, and the deer are doing this now. I just saw some fresh buck rub on some trees on my land, and so this can start as early as late August. And I'm not a deer biologist, but my understanding is that they're both marking their territory with other bucks and rubbing the velvet off of their antlers. So they aim for these smaller trees that can fit in between the little points on their antlers and get in there. So no matter if your little tree has its own corky bark and doesn't need sunscald protection, it still needs to be protected from deer antlers. Rabbits and small rodents do the girdling of the trunk, as you can see on the right here. So while deer don't feed on trunk bark, rabbits and rodents do. There's a lot of sweet stuff underneath that bark. There's a lot of nutrients down there. And so they will just chew on that all winter when there's not much else for food sources out there. So we need to protect against that, because like this little tree on the right, it's been girdled all the way around and it is very much dead. And because there's no connection from the roots to the top of the tree anymore. And sometimes these trees will have enough energy and nutrients in the buds and stuff so that spring comes along and they leaf out, they might even bloom, and people are all excited because, oh, I guess that wasn't really a problem. But then come June, when things start getting warmer and they can't take up roots or water from the roots, the tree will collapse. Okay, so to protect from that, you need to do another kind of wrap. Very often these wraps can serve multiple purposes, okay? But with protecting against animal damage on the trunk, you need to put it where they are going to be, which is typically low. Make sure that you get it all the way to the ground, even if you can push that a ½ inch into the ground so that the voles can't crawl up underneath it and get against that trunk and chew on that bark. This again on the left is the corrugated type of a thing. If you were doing this for sunscald as well, I would want this to be higher. So maybe putting another one up on there. On the right here, this is what's called hardware cloth, and it's just metal, but the space between the wires is less than a ½ inch so that the voles and field mice and things can't crawl through there, okay? Try to leave it a little bit out from the bark so that you don't damage the bark at all, but you need to get that on there like now, because the food sources are freezing and they will start looking for other things to chew on. A lot of this damage happens in the dead of winter when there's a lot of snow out there and there's not much else for them to eat. From the deer standpoint of rubbing the antlers on there, you need to go higher and you need to go stronger. And there's lots of commercial things out there that you can buy, but you can do homemade things as well, just by creating, like on the right here, a little fence around the tree that will have some space in it so they can't get up against that tiny little tree that's growing in the middle here. You can, like these T-posts, this one in this picture is here to hold up that fencing, but you could even just, pound 5 T-posts in around that tree so that the deer can't get into the tree with its antlers because the T-posts are in the way. You can just get creative, but anything that can keep those antlers away from your tree is super, super, super important. And then we have animal damage where they're actually feeding on the branch tips. And this can be with small trees, it can be with shrubs. If you're wondering what critter is actually doing the damage during winter, it's going to be a rabbit or a deer, because those are the things that eat branch tips during the winter. Rabbits have teeth and the ability to prune the branch tips off very neatly. So you can see that it looks like somebody actually came through with a pruner and made a nice angled, clean cut on there. If that's what you're finding on your plants come spring, it was rabbits. Deer don't have teeth in the front on the top, and so when they feed on the branch tips of trees or shrubs, they have to tear it off. So if it looks kind of ragged, that it was ripped off, then that was deer that did it. Okay. And if you're in an area that is prone to deer coming through, you have to do different protections than if you're just doing rabbit protection. So here's a great picture of a nice new fruit tree that's been planted. It is well protected from deer. So this fence has been put up around it far enough out that the deer can't stick its head over the top and feed on it. It's got T-posts in there so that it's nice and sturdy. But this tree is still susceptible to sunscald and rodent damage. So even though the rabbits and the deer can't get at it, here in Wisconsin, I would still want to have that trunk wrapped for sunscald and vole protection as well. Otherwise, if it's a shrub, really a physical barrier of putting a fence around it so that those rabbits can't get at it is super, super important. It's really your best option to put up that physical barrier. You can take these down during the summer if you don't want to look at them, but if it's like off in the back somewhere, maybe you don't need to. With a fruit tree, when it's young like this, if the deer nip off all the branch tips and stuff, it can disfigure the tree. It can set it back. It may not actually kill it, but it can be a problem. But once a tree is more mature and it's bigger and the branches are bigger, a little bit of nibbling by deer isn't going to hurt. So you don't have to fence it forever and ever. But if you have shrubs just growing like in your landscape somewhere that the rabbits want to chew down every year, putting some kind of fencing around it is really, really great. And remember that as snow goes up, so goes the rabbit. So this is a picture one of my master gardeners sent me, and she did what she thought was all the right thing. She planted this little shrub and she put the corrugated wrap around it and stuff, and came spring, and you can see that all the bark was stripped off from it by rabbits. And that's because the rabbit went up as the snow went up. So deer can't necessarily walk on the tree or on the snow, but deer can. So that is definitely something to keep in mind, because one big snowstorm and those rabbits are taller than they used to be. With evergreens, we don't normally have to worry about sun scald, but we do have to worry about feeding. And the biggest one that we get at, of course, are arborvitaes. And these are some comical pictures here, but arborvitaes in Wisconsin, if you've got deer in the area, they love them. They don't eat them during the summer so much, but in the winter, it's a major great food source for them. So they all start looking like morel mushrooms here, and that's not usually what we want them to look at. So, our best advice, of course, is if you're in a deer prone area, don't plant arborvitae, plant junipers or something else that they don't feed on as much. But if you really want arborvitae or you have them, you do need to put up some kind of protection. So you can do fencing, you can get all kinds of these crazy tree wraps out there. And this just looks, comical to me, but I have seen when people have like decorated these up to be like garden gnomes or Santa's elves or wizards or things like that. So maybe you can be getting some winter decoration out of them as well. But this will definitely keep the deer from feeding on them. You do have to be careful that whatever you use, that it breathes well so that it doesn't hold moisture or build up heat underneath there, maybe providing some good venting so that any heat can escape out of there. So there are concerns with that, but there is that option for wrapping your arborvitae so that they don't get chewed down. And here again is a nice fencing thing. That deer is trying to get his nose in there to eat on that arborvitae, and you need to go as tall as the deer are. If you've got small seedlings, like this is a small white pine seedling, the deer will come along and they'll nip off those tasty buds on the tip, and then that'll disfigure the central leader of the tree. So if you have small trees like this, make sure that you protect the tip on the growing point of the tree. This is a little plastic mesh thing that's pretty easy to get around these little seedlings, at least until they're taller that the deer can't reach that top terminal bud. I've also known of people who have wrapped those terminal buds in tin foil or pipe cleaners or something like that so that the deer can't chew them and break them off. Another option are repellents, and repellents are it's not that they don't work at all, but repellents have the challenge that you need to reapply them regularly. They evaporate, they wash off, and animals get used to them. So they learn to plug their nose. So if you use repellents, you have to be really dedicated to get out there. I'm not. So, if it's January and the snow is 2 feet deep and the wind is blowing and the wind chill is 20 below, I'm likely not going to go out and apply repellent, and one gap in that repellent and the animals can do a lot of damage. So keep that in mind. There are and rotate your repellents because they do get used to them. Okay, there are lots of commercial products available. There are home remedies like cayenne pepper and garlic and rotten eggs and things like that, and I suggest that you try them all. Okay, but again, you need to be dedicated to it. Also, be sure to read the label on any commercial products that you buy to make sure you use it correctly and on the right plants, because some of them could cause some damage. And if you're using a home remedy, it's always a good idea to apply it to a small area first and make sure that it doesn't like burn the plant or damage the plant, that sort of a thing. But repellents might be part of your arsenal as well. And then there are just a couple little other things to mention here. So salt damage and snow and ice storms. If you have plants that are near sidewalks or driveways and stuff, be very careful about any kind of salt, de-icing salts that you're using. There are some that are more environmentally friendly than others. There are other options like wood ash or kitty litter that can give you traction. But this salt, which is right outside my office door because they oversalt the sidewalks by my office, you can see it gets into the soil, and that's why the grass isn't growing well here, but it can also burn tree roots and cause desiccation. Also, if you have a plant that's near an area where salt spray might splash up, wrapping that plant to keep that salt spray off the foliage might be important in winter. And then if you have shrubs that are near buildings where snow might drift down or fall down off the roof, on this arborvitae, for example, it can get up on there and it can split the shrub or flatten it. So you can buy or make little support systems like this net here. And then the other thing is that's often during winter, especially spring and fall, we get ice storms, and we can get the ice buildup on trees and shrubs, and it can get so thick that it can cause damage. We, have branches hanging down to the ground, branches snap off, that sort of a thing. Normally, it's best if you just let that ice melt off on its own. But if you've got something where the branches are hanging all the way to the ground and you think that might snap off, if you want to go out there and gently tap some branches with a broom, a nice soft broom, to snap a little bit of that weight off of there, you can try that. But remember that those branches are frozen and they can break very quickly. So don't go whacking on it hard, because you can do more damage than good. But that is also a concern as the winter weather goes along. And that is it for my timing here. Do we have questions?
Thank you, Diana. That was a lot of wonderful information. I'm going to just make a note here that we are going to drop a link to our survey in the chat. If you could respond to that with any additional questions and help us out, that would be great. So let's start with a question here, Diana. Is an electric fence effective to keep deer out of orchards? Any recommendations?
Yes, they are very, very good. There are solar powered chargers out there now and battery powered chargers, so you don't even need a plug-in nearby. Super, super good for keeping deer. Typically, what I hear people do is when you first set it up, spread a little peanut butter on the wires. The deer come along, they taste the peanut butter, they get zapped, and then they stay away. So very effective.
Good recommendation. I wouldn't have thought about the peanut butter.
Mm.
We got another one here for you. Would it be better to wrap white spire birch saplings with burlap, surround with wire fencing, or should I wrap the trunks?
So white spire birch, it depends on what you're protecting for. So they tend to have, that more peely bark and stuff. So they're not as susceptible to sunscald. But if you're protecting against the deer, that sort of a thing, burlap can be enough because they don't rub through that burlap. Fencing, I don't know that you need to do both of them. You're just creating a barrier from keeping those antlers off the bark of the trunk. And burlap can be a really good wrapping as well if you've got some available. There's no need to spend money on a commercial product.
Another one here for you. Would rabbits feed on newly planted yews?
I don't think it's their favorite, but in a pinch, deer, rabbits, they'll feed on just about anything, especially if there's not much else for a food source in there. So I'm not 100% sure how tasty they are, but if it were me, I would protect against it, or, at least watch during the winter. The thing is that with yews, they would start nibbling on the tips of the branches. There's nothing that says you can't run out there in January and put some kind of protection around then. So if you want to give it a chance and see, that's okay too. Sunscald, we really have to get that protection on early on. For the rodent feeding on trunks, we really need to get that protection on early on. But if it's branch tip feeding, we can add that during the winter as well as needed.
Diana, thinking about the rodent damage or rabbits feeding. Now, if people are experiencing that all year long, they could keep that fencing up all year long, especially on those young shrubs or trees, right?
Right. You can definitely keep that up if you don't mind looking at it. But just make sure that it's not up against the trunk or like rubbing on the trunk in the wind or restricting the expansion of the trunk, that sort of a thing, because we've all seen like trees where the barbed wire fence has grown into the trunk because it was up against it for multiple years. So just make sure that you check it regularly so that it's not, that the wrap or the fencing is not causing any damage to the plant.
And let's do one more here, Diana, just before we wrap up. There's a couple questions about the sun scalding and the wrap, and that is just for winter time and not for the rest of the year. And there was also a comment or a question about painting the bark white.
Yes.
So could you just comment on those things?
Yep. So like in the big nurseries and stuff, they obviously can't take the labor to go through and wrap every tree every year. So what they will actually do is go through and whitewash the trunks on the south side. And again, the light color, that helps to reflect the sunlight off of the trunk so that the trunk won't warm up as much. So wrapping it is better. Okay, putting the wraps like I talked about is better. But if you have a lot of young trees or you just can't get them all wrapped, going out and painting that trunk is fine. Use a water-based paint, a latex paint. You don't want a thick oil thing. You don't want a stain on there. But just again, getting it as light colored as possible so that the sun reflects off and doesn't warm the trunk as much will offer some protection. But again, a wrap is going to be better. You just don't know what the weather's going to be. You know, in some years we wouldn't have a problem at all because even if it warms up, it doesn't get that cold that fast, so the cells don't die under there. But we can't count on that.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you for everybody to be here. Please take a moment to fill out our quick survey. And this was recorded, so it'll be up on our website in about a week. Thank you so much.